Hello, everybody. Welcome to our final session of the CTEC Summit. My name's Randy Messick. I'm a Client Services Director for the Great Lakes region. A little bit about me. I used to be a recreational hot air balloon pilot. And one of the things you learn as flying hot air balloons is that once you pull that burner and that flame goes up in the envelope, it takes 20 to 40 seconds for the balloon to react to that flame. And the only reason I bring that up is because in this particular platform, all the words you're hearing, I've actually said 20 to 40 seconds ago. And part of that is, I'm sure you know by now how to use the chat and the polls and the Q&A. We're going to release all the poll questions now, because there's really no way to do it with the 20 to 40 second delay in a way that makes sense to space it out. So if you would please go to the polls and start answering some of those questions, we'll be referring back to them throughout the session today. And it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. David Finn and Mr. Erik Decker from University of Chicago Medicine, who will be the panelists today. From there, I am going to turn it over to you, Mr. Finn.
Thank you, Randy. I appreciate it. And yeah, there is a delay, so we're waiting for things to slide up. We have saved the best for last, though, for the 2-day summit, and we're going to start by talking about a recap of the summit. And what we've heard, some of the things we've heard, and I've asked Erik here to share with me his experiences. I don't know if he's heard any of the summit, but I know he has thoughts about all these things. So we're going to have him talking to us about some of the recap. I'll go back to yesterday morning. We started the session with our own CEO, Caleb Barlow, who talked about the changes that the pandemic has caused in terms of cybersecurity incident response. And he asked some very intriguing questions about like where we are and what we're doing and those kinds of things. But he asked a really important question, I think, about what is critical infrastructure, because critical infrastructure post-COVID is it's working and educating our children from home. It's the supply chain is now our critical infrastructure. Navigation systems. He talked about maritime and air navigation, particularly around Garmin, and social media and Twitter. And he talked about rethinking security in terms of response and priorities. And then we had a session with Ite Mayor, thinking like a hacker. And he started with the military approach. It's a battle with criminals. And he was really focusing on open source intel and why intel is so important to CISOs today. And his little demo with law students, his law students who went out. And he talked about the fact that it's people, process, and technology. But what the criminals attack are the people, not really the technology, kind of a shift in the way we've historically thought about them. Then we had a session on privacy and security working together and some of the issues that have come up around COVID-19 and contact tracing, as well as remote health care. And we heard some of the incidents and the new risks that have arisen around that. And we worked through the recap. We heard Ted Harrington's talk, and he talked about being better together, how we all need to share information, whether we're being assessed and sharing information with our assessor or sharing information with a competitor or a partner down the street. We talked about the new normal. Ben Dankers from Synergistic talked about the shift we've had to undergo as a security and privacy firm to deliver new privacy and security services that are important in the post-COVID world. And then we kicked off this morning with privacy threats in healthcare with Nick Culbertson from Protennis. And the fact that they're not abating, they're getting worse. Insiders seem to be getting better, but we continue to have growing problems there. And the privacy threats that can happen to you. Dave Bailey from Synergistic did a recap of our annual report, which was just released today, and some of the findings there. And the fact that if you're not making progress in today's world, you're actually sliding back. He even talked briefly about the findings from 2020 assessments. Even though they have been slower to come this year, people are shifting work back later in the year. But the focus that we need to shift from getting a score or from getting a good risk assessment, but shift to actually reducing our risk. Then we had a session on network medical devices, a case study from Banner Healthcare. And again, we looked at some of the issues around medical devices during COVID and how a lot of medical devices had to be added to a healthcare's networks. And they might not have known what they had already, and now they're adding new virtually unknown devices. And then we had our own red team from Synergistic talking about the different ways that the bad guys think about data, very different from the way we think about data. And so today's session is really going to be my thoughts, that's the mine part, yours, which is going to be Erik Decker's thoughts, and then we're going to do some polling with all of you and highlight the R's of that. And I'm going to let Erik do a brief introduction of himself, and then we'll dig in.
Sure. Thank you, David. First of all, I just want to make sure everybody can hear me. Give me a thumbs up on that, David.
Okay, I can hear you fine.
You know, I've been having, it's just so strange. You'd think that we've been doing this for 6 months now, that this would all be ironed out, but it seems like there still continues to be challenges. So so hi, I'm Erik Decker. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer, as well as the Chief Privacy Officer for the University of Chicago Medicine. That is I know, somewhat unique in a lot of organizations. I was actually on the Privacy and Information Security seminar, asking some questions on that one and sort of listening to the thinking on that front. So I'd love to dive into the convergence of those two roles and what that means sort of in a modern way. Hopefully we'll get into that today. In addition to my day job, I'm also the industry lead for, this is going to be a long-winded thing, so I apologize for the acronyms up front. It's the Health and Human Services 405D effort. This is the 405D effort is an effort that was born out of legislation from the Cybersecurity Act of 2015. And there is a section inside of that act called 405D that calls for aligning cybersecurity practices across the healthcare industry. So I, myself, with about 250 other industry leads and government experts, have developed, since we started back in about 2017, we developed a document called HICCUP, the Health Industry Cybersecurity Practices, Managing Threats and Protecting Patients. It's a compendium, a 4-volume compendium that helps the healthcare industry at large sort of understand what are the most meaningful cybersecurity practices to manage the threats that we face today. And that was actually produced at the end of 2018. And we are continuing to produce more and working on more content. So my role in that is the industry lead, so facilitating on behalf of industry and working with my government counterparts within Health and Human Services, as well as authoring and editing and all the other fun stuff that comes with building content and guides. Of course, I do a bunch of other stuff, but I think those are probably the most meaningful things to just introduce myself with.
You guys
very good.
Interrupt for a second? I noticed quite a few new members joining the broadcast here. I just want to quickly remind everyone again that the poll questions are open right now, and if you could answer them, that would be great. And Just as a quick reminder, David, if you did have something to share on your screen, it is not being shared right now.
It went away.
It went away. Yes, it did.
Is it back?
It is back. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Eric, and I'll do a very brief introduction, and when you look at this resume, you understand why I have Eric on the call, and it isn't just me, because, well, he had all those impressive credentials. I have a couple degrees in theater, but I do have about 40 years in information technology, in healthcare, focused on, I like to say, creating and maintaining trust in and value from information and technology systems. So I've kind of skipped ahead, and we did the recap on the conference, and my slide for that is this. I used to use this slide and say the cat is a CISO, but really today, as we heard on and on through the conference, is it's a privacy officer. The poor cat is a compliance officer. The poor cat is almost anyone in healthcare as we watch what's going to change and happen to us. But when Eric and I started talking about this, we talked about the original vision. He's so active and involved in some of the federal initiatives. And I remember in 2004 when George Bush declared it's the decade of the electronic medical record and some of the visions. So I don't know if you had any thoughts about what you heard or any themes. The big theme seems to be change. But one of the things we talked about, Eric, was this vision we had way back in 2004, if not earlier, of going paperless. And do you think COVID-19 has helped or hindered that?
You know, I think it has. It's interesting. So first, I think you have to consider what makes up our healthcare institutions. And, you know, I think prior to COVID, there has been a very dominant perspective that in order to be productive and just generally productive, you have to have, you know, quote unquote, butts and seats at work in order to do that properly. And so we've built an entire infrastructure around supporting the worker in the office. And when I talk about the healthcare worker, I'm not obviously the clinician and the providers are needing to be in the office, and some of the support and technicians and everybody that makes up the care delivery team in a direct manner is necessary to have an interaction in that manner. What is different, though, are the support groups and the folks that are not necessarily patient facing, but you know can do their job in more of a back office capacity. That mindset, I truly believe, has shifted away from those individuals have to be in the office to those individuals can be productive and do their work anywhere. Now, in order to actually achieve that, there's lots of new challenges that come to bear. So when you think about a mobile worker, and that's sort of how I'll classify that group of people, and you think about a culture that is used to working sort of on-prem, you've got things like people making printouts on all kinds of documentation a lot of the time. You know, people wet signing contracts and scanning those contracts into systems. There's a lot of like just literal paper movement that happens. Even maybe potentially culturally, like maybe you're in an institution where when you go to a meeting, there's printouts of the meeting materials that are, you know, provided ahead of time and instead of, you know, displaying electronically. I think that's kind of a legacy of healthcare taking a long time to sort of get to the digital age, and where most outside of healthcare, the rest of the industry has probably already been in sort of a digital manner. So COVID is introduced to us now, you know, just like big tech has been there, and the big consulting firms, if you think about them, you know, they have a mobile workforce that can go anywhere. They can work anywhere. Everything is contained within their laptop or endpoint or, you know, whatever it is that they're using. And as they come in and out of the office, even down to the point where you're hoteling, you don't necessarily even have permanent spaces inside the office anymore. You sort of hotel into a cubicle or an office. That's all very new to healthcare, but I think that's where we're going now, because we've just proved out that we can have a very significant portion of our workforce, probably about 30%, I would say, 40% of the workforce, that doesn't need to be on site in the office taking up space. And that space, is expensive, and it can be repurposed for clinical purposes, for research purposes, whatever the needs are for leveraging, high cost square footage in that manner. So now, to achieve all of that, David, you asked the question about paperless, and so what does that mean to be paperless? In my mind, it means that we have to move away from the mindset of, I need a physical thing, in my hands, and all the workflows, all the business processes that we run that generally require that, they can be converted into digital platforms. These platforms have been around for a very long time. Contract signatures can be done with e-signature platforms. Collaborative tools, document tools are out there, so you can write collaboratively and do that. All of this can be done in a HIPAA compliant manner as well. It's really a big move as well to the cloud in order to enable that, since most of those features are cloud enabled features, where you think about where those things live. And it requires a culture shift within healthcare to achieve it. And the policies and the gumption of the institution to sort of stand behind it and say, this is where we want to go, this is what we want to be. And I think if you can get there, if you, as strange as this sounds, if we can cut the tether to paper, then we can cut the tether to the geography of the local institution, our local hospitals, our local clinics, and we can open up the workforce to way beyond just the immediate surroundings, way beyond the immediate city, way beyond the immediate state. You can open that up into the country as well, because those physical things that you had relied on in the past in the office are no longer necessary. So I think what you're going to see, David, is there's many healthcare companies that I've spoken to that are embracing this new doctrine of the mobile workforce can still be mobile. They can be permanently mobile. And I think they'll have a competitive edge, honestly, as well, in this space if they can adopt it and shift into that mindset.
Yeah, and ironically, I don't think it's the workers that need the cultural shift. I'm just sitting here thinking back, and it was 18 years ago as a CIO, I sent coders home at the request of our health plan, and they wanted to do it because they wanted the space for more customer or member facing activities. And the battle was actually in our C-suite, not with the people we were sending home, but their argument was, we won't know what they're doing, and so they tried to make IT the management police. And I said, if all you want to see is how many records they've processed or looked at, we can do that better here remotely than you could do it watching them at their desk. So I think that'll be interesting, but it does raise, and I agree with you, Eric, we can send a lot of people home and use that space for patient-facing activities. But one of the things we heard throughout the conference, we heard it from our red team and from some of the threat intel people, and we heard it a common theme from Nick Culbertson from ProTennis, who was saying privacy is a program and tools. Privacy is really about educating the workforce and then having tools to prevent them or to catch them when they're doing bad things. So how does that change how we educate and train workforce in terms of both privacy and security if we send them off site?
Yeah, well, from a training perspective, I mean, I think all of these answers are going to be, you need to go digital in order to make this work. And the training platforms that are used, computer-based training, you need to double down on having actual resources available to sort of walk through all the various elements of what your policies are, what your procedures are, putting the context of the remote worker at bear, and making, of course, the training specific to the role that you have, and just making that meaningful to them. So, when you think about it, if your workers are going to be home, you're going to obviously have access to PHI from home. You need to make sure that the home area is appropriately secure. I'm not suggesting. I've seen some very extreme measures that people have suggested, like required a dedicated office with a door that's closed and a monitor on the door with a camera on the person in the office. And if the door opens up, everything closes down. I said, that's extreme. That's way too much. But so if that's like one end of the spectrum, the other end of the spectrum isn't that the mobile worker just has their laptop on at all times and are using it for personal use and business use, and their kids are playing around on it, and the spouse is using it for whatever, and people are just in the data and accessing that highly sensitive information. So obviously, neither one of those extremes works. But kind of going back to the end of the edge of this is getting out of paper, getting out of printing things reduces the footprint of where that data is exposed significantly, and then it gets you putting it about the devices themselves and keeping the devices themselves locked up with the right policies, with the right security tools on top of them. And there is a huge back-end cloud infrastructure and remote access infrastructure that needs to be adjusted to enable all of that to happen in a meaningful way. So I think one thing as well that to think about is organizations should probably consider, if the worker is going to be mobile, what needs to be done to set up that office in a comfortable way. I've been mobile now for 6 months. I've been back in the office only a few times. I'll say that the early stage of this, it was easy. 6 months in, it's not so easy. It's sort of reality is setting in. But at the same token, my institution is looking at doing this in a permanent manner, and so it's about, okay, well, what's the adjustment that I need to do, sort of personally, in order to sort of stay connected and stay in, to the institution. So setting up the home office, perhaps providing stipends, to employees to set up the home office in a meaningful way. There are things like, having the right level of bandwidth in place, although I've been having issues myself and I have plenty of bandwidth. So who knows, sometimes the home network isn't that great. But providing stipends for internet usage and those types of things, depending on how your policies are going to go. I think those are important considerations if you're going to request the worker to be remote, in a more of a permanent type of capacity. And then sorry, David, and then from a threat perspective, I think about, from a threat and risk perspective, I think about the risks in really three ways. We're increasing our risks about data leakage and how it can get out, because again, it's sort of outside the four walls now of the institution. So you have to change your mindset on your data protection programs and how you do that. Your attack surface is increased because now your devices are outside, again, the four walls. So you really have to think about the identity of the person, and you have to think about protecting the identity and protecting the endpoint, and making sure that the endpoint protections that you have in place are robust and modern. And then the infrastructure that it takes to support all of that is new. And so there could be, so I think there's increased risks on that infrastructure. And so you have to just manage and maintain that and make sure that's all configured properly, managed properly, patched properly, et cetera.
Yeah, and that gets down to the question Caleb asked with now home networks are part of your critical infrastructure, and that will be an interesting model to have to support and deploy.
Yeah, and I think about that as the home network isn't new. The the airport isn't new, the Starbucks isn't new. I think what's new is there's just going to be far more people in those environments than were there before. I mean, we've always had people in those environments. It's been a much smaller percentage of the workforce that was there. So again, our security mindset has to change to assume the environment that you're in is hostile. Assume that people are going to connect in from those types of places. You're not going to be able to guarantee that the environment is not hostile, that where your workers are connecting from. So you have to build your platforms and your endpoints and your policies and procedures in a way that makes it safe in a hostile environment. And there are definitely technologies that can do that, but you have to start thinking in that way and managing in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been hearing a lot over the past couple of days about change, and we've seen and certainly heard that over the last 6 months in the media. And I'm really talking about the whole healthcare press, not just security and privacy. So there's probably some things that we're not talking about and should be. Like one could argue that this gate is locked. I would say that it's not really secured. But let's talk about some of the other things that are going on in healthcare that will have impacts around privacy and security that we don't hear much about. One of those is probably first and foremost is budget cuts and what that will do to maturity around security. We heard from Dave Bailey today. We looked at our assessments over the last 3 years, and we find that as a sector, we're actually slipping back in terms of conformance with NIST CSF. You think budgets are going to play into this?
Yeah, I mean, they absolutely do. And I think everybody who's in healthcare, which I believe is everybody in this session, has experienced the pressure, the financial pressure. Shutting down your institution effectively, turning down your ORs, turning down your service lines, be it cancer or cardiac or whatever those service lines are, comes with severe hit on the bottom line. Now, the CARES Act helped, and the reimbursements of that helped. It did not get us back in. It didn't make us whole to pre-COVID volumes, but it got it got many back, sort of that. I guess I probably should say many who are large enough and had the benefits of cash flow and reserves. It got them back to a place of operation that was better than where we were before, or where we could be. I think there are a lot of community hospitals, safety net hospitals, and smaller practices that are very hurt by this. When you think about it, if your margins are already sub 1%, COVID is not making that any positive. You're not going to the positive. You're in the negative. It's just almost guaranteed that that's how you're going to be operating for a little while. If you are lucky to be one of the groups that can be potentially between 2 to 5%, you might have just had to tighten up the cinch up the pants a little bit, defer a bunch of projects, defer capital, defer et cetera, and sort of like to try to weather the storm. But at the same token, this is all happening at the same time when things like the Cures Act is going on and interoperability is happening and those requirements and information blocking. And, so we are, as an industry, trying to open up the record, open up the information, give it, liberate it back to the patient so the patient can have it as see fit, while cutting, financial budgets, the budget side to deal with this. So I think we're going to have a hangover, honestly, for about 12 months or so would be my guess. Once we get through COVID and we get the volumes back up to where it was pre-COVID, there's going to be a big urge from within and without to accelerate and get back up to the level, the growth process and the strategy that was set pre-COVID. And it's going to be hard, to try to get through all of that pent up demand that is built up. Honestly, I mean, I'm sure many on this call have already felt that pent up demand. And but there's a financial reality here is the brunt of it. And, you can't, you have to run a business, you have to run the healthcare side. And of course, security and privacy got cut in with everything else that got cut,
Well, you've kind of touched on the next things I wanted to talk about. You talked about reimbursements, and we're not sure what changes are gonna stick or be changed around telehealth, and that it's speculation. But you used to spend a lot of time in Washington, D.C. Now you probably spend a lot of time on the phone to Washington, D.C. or on Zoom. But what do you think from where you're sitting at UCM and what you're hearing coming out of Washington? What are going to be the differentiators in healthcare, and how does IT, security, and privacy fit into those differentiators?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think it just goes back to the theme, what we were talking about before, starting with paperless and mobile workforce and changing the model. Healthcare is expensive, and part of that expense is not only just the direct patient care expense, of course, but there's also all the support expense, the infrastructure expense, all the various groups that it takes to actually run a healthcare business. And, when you look at it's really interesting. When our CMO provided this stat back when we were in the office, and went and showed sort of the spectrum of globally the investment in healthcare, and the outcomes. And I think the outcome that he was plotting out was life expectancy. And there was a nice sort of sloped curve, sort of not a logarithmic curve, but just a sloped curve, that showed, some countries that invest like a fair amount have really good outcomes, like Sweden, Germany, I think the UK. These are all countries that do not have super expensive healthcare costs, but actually have pretty good life expectancy. And then you look at the U.S. and it's the anomaly on that graph. The U.S. is so far off to the right, and the health expectancy is lower than it is in some of these other countries that was plotted out. And why is that? It's because we spend a ton of money on healthcare, tons and tons of money on healthcare. So what's going to be the differentiator? I mean, we're looking at this as, how do we reappropriate budgets and costs? It's not just about, additive. It's about, reinvestment and driving efficiency back into the system. I think the companies that are going to differentiate themselves are going to be the ones that actually figure out how to do more with less, actually figure out how to take on the models of what other industries have done, what big tech has done, what consulting firms have done, and leverage these more modern techniques. We streamline the technology platforms. We consolidate the technology platforms. I mean, I don't know about you, but I know personally that everybody wants a new tool. Everybody wants a new thing. And all of that stuff comes with cost. And that adds to the cost basis of what drives up healthcare. And maybe it's because that one particular widget has a particular capability at a particular thing that you particularly want. But there could be 5 other tools or one enterprise tool that can do that too. And if you can get more into enterprise thinking and get off of these onesie twosie types of implementations, you're going to have a competitive advantage because your cost is going to go lower. I think it's a matter of that. Like, we got to figure out how to reduce the cost burden on the organization. We have to figure out how to adopt these modern practices. We have to figure out how to get into the cloud and actually leverage that to its full capability, and repurpose that space that we have. inside healthcare for that like really important clinical touch.
Yeah, we all have to get over bright, shiny object syndrome. You mentioned early at the top of the session that you have responsibility for both privacy and information security, Erik, and I did many years ago accidentally when I was both the privacy and security officer, and this is actually a photo of me when I left the provider space after having been the privacy and security officer. You look much better than I did, and you clearly probably get along with yourself. You heard the session we had on the CTEP summit. So I'm going to let you talk about some of the advantages and the disadvantages of having both roles. For example, did having both those functions help you in dealing with the COVID-19 issues? And was there anything that it slowed down, and what and how did it help or hinder?
I think honestly, I don't think we were slowed down at all by this by COVID because of the fact that I'm both the CPO and the CISO. In fact, I think it really. So I mean, I definitely have two teams that support all of those functions, and those teams, as was discussed in that one session, it's super important for the privacy and security teams to be aligned with one another. By having this under me, it's intrinsic that the teams will support and integrate with one another. And in fact, to a degree, we embed operational processes amongst the teams that might be uncomfortable to try to do that if it weren't all part of one org. So getting into COVID and switching over into that piece, we transitioned, I think, just as well as everybody else transitioned. I don't think there was any hiccups on that front. I'm not going to say that we were perfect at it. I think we all learned a lot in the middle of all of that. Now, I will say, I think there's a friend of mine, his name's Todd Fitzgerald. He wrote a book called The CISO Compass. And in that book, there is sort of a five-step evolution of the CISO, starting from the early 90s to where we are today in 2020. And sort of the journey there was, early 90s, it was about passwords and putting a password on something. Then you get into the 2000s, it's about compliance. Then you move and you become a risk-aware CISO. And then suddenly you're from a risk-aware CISO becoming a threat-aware CISO who understands how threats and risks and such sort of come together. The fifth stage in his book is the privacy-aware CISO. And I mean, let's just face it. Everything is going to be digital. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we're not on paper. I mean, there might still be some legacy paper around, but the systems themselves will have the data. Protection of the data is obviously paramount. We've known this for a long time. And the CISO, whether or not they are officially a CPO or not, they're going to have to understand the privacy regulations and the privacy elements. So in my mind's eye, it's you better start now if you don't already know how to become accountable for managing privacy and the elements of privacy. And that doesn't necessarily mean taking over the privacy shop. So don't like misquote me on that. But it definitely means that you have responsibility as the CISO and as a security program for enabling and making a privacy function successful. Because the privacy people are not going to be able to survive and do all of this without the help of IT and security to actually enable the capabilities and the features that are necessary to make their jobs work well. Now, in the same token, I'm also going to posit that if you think about what a privacy function does, they have a lot of oversight pieces. They've got governance, they've got policy development, they've got education, they've got contract and contract management types of things with BAAs, et cetera. They review data usage, appropriateness of data usage, data disclosure. They audit the use of the systems and the tools for appropriateness to make sure that the individuals are using the tools pursuant to regulation. All of that sounds very similar to things that we do in security, right? Everything I just said, you could probably go, oh yeah, I do that on the security side and that and that and that and that and that. So think about like the governance, risk, and compliance functions that you might have. What is that about? It's about governance. It's about risk management. It's about policies and procedures. It's about understanding your compliance postures. It's about identification of risk and management of the risk. Those muscles are the same as they are on the privacy side. The expertise is different. That's the difference. And so something that I'm doing in my organization, since I'm both, I'm actually merging those two functions together, the GRC function and the privacy function. Now, again, the people are the expertise of the people and the SMEs. They are specific to what their roles are. You know, a GRC function is one thing and a privacy analyst is another. But the leadership, it's all reporting in under my deputy. And because again, the similarities of the mechanics of that are so similar. There's a lot of synergy and there's a lot of ways that we can very much accelerate both programs by leveraging all the resources in a more novel way. Now, I say that because when I was listening to the other session, there was a lot of discussion about the CISO and the CPO should not be the same person. There's a lot of conflict of interest associated to that, reporting structures, all of that, and and I nodded my head on a lot of that. I mean, there's absolutely challenges with this. Don't get me wrong; it's not a perfect nirvana state. But I think a lot of that might be sort of the legacy thinking about how healthcare has predominantly operated. Healthcare has, from a privacy perspective, there's really only a few industries that actually have the requirement of a dedicated privacy officer. HIPAA obviously requires that. Financial institutions require that. There's plenty of other industries that don't require that. That there be one named individual that has that function and has that role. So you're seeing the other groups pick that up, be it legal, be it compliance officer, be it a CISO, is taking those things on. I think we have to learn as well from outside our industry on how they've done that and work on shedding the history, the sacred past, and trying to move into something that's more modern and flexible and agile, honestly.
And that leads me to kind of one last question about this. And we heard this from our privacy speakers, and we heard this from our security speakers today. But we talked about you talked about training around the workforce and clinicians. But now in this new world where our patients are remote, what's this new world going to look like, and what efforts going to be required in terms of patient awareness and training from the security and privacy officer going forward?
Yeah, that is an interesting one, and I go immediately to the Cures Act, and that's where information blocking is where my brain goes with that question. Because, and as well, I mean, I think you've probably seen OCR just recently demonstrated several enforcement actions on patient right of access. And that's where really the Cures Act and information blocking is doubling down on is the statement of patients have a right to this information. They have a right to this data. However they want to consume it, you have to be able to deliver it in that manner. Regardless of the risks associated to the patient. It's the patient that's making the decision on if they want to accept that risk or not you as an institution. So I think that this is going to be interesting. I don't know if I have a magic 8-ball on this. I'll say that probably, again, everybody is on the same path of this journey, which is, there are exceptions under the information blocking rule on privacy and security. But, those exceptions are not that if you implement, say, an API and it pushes it into malware app, that is being used by the patient, that you have a right to not deliver that to the patient. No, that's not how the exception works. The exception says you can inform the patient that there is a risk to this particular app, but if the patient says, "Give it to me," you have to give it to them, assuming that the other exceptions don't apply. I think we as healthcare organizations are going to do the first step, which is figure out how to actually deliver all of this. And then the second, after that is done, the second step of what types of educational programs are you going to want to add into this, if you even have the capacity and bandwidth to do it. I mean, I could get a little concerned that trying to evaluate every single application that a patient might want to use for security and privacy is it's incredibly challenging to even think about that. It's challenging enough to do it for current third-party apps and third-party corporations inside the healthcare system that help make the healthcare system run. Education-wise, I think it's just going to have to be, at those touch points when patients are asking for this, you inform them that you have to be conscious of where and who is accessing this information and how it's being accessed. But this is certainly your right, and if this is the way you would like to have it, you can have it that way.
Great. I had one other thing I wanted to talk about, but I think for time's sake, let's cut right to the polling questions, and I can't see those. So Randy, can you help us out here? I've got that first one up. What did the numbers tell us?
Yeah, so the first question here about reshuffling your security program, it's a solid 75% is a yes, 25% being a no.
That sounds right.
And did you, Eric?
Oh yeah. We did a whole, my whole strategy shifted. We ended up doing a brand new strategy for the fiscal year, honestly, because of it.
And I guess we can go on and take a look at number 2. Is your organization proposing or already moving to full-time remote or non-essential employees?
Yeah, this is even a higher result. I'm actually seeing a few more results come in as people notice the poll, but we're about 87% of a yes on this one. So that's a pretty significant shift.
I have just hired my first out-of-state employee just this week, permanent full-time.
So does that help hiring for you?
It did. It really did. I mean, once we were able to sort of get past the initial shock of it, it opened up the pool a lot.
So one of the upsides of an additional upside of remote workers, and number 3, if you're going remote, are you opening up recruitment of resources outside your local area? So now we'll see if the audience followed your lead, Eric.
Yeah, this is a little more interesting. It's just about a 60% yes, though, I have to wonder if there's a lack of hiring going on, which may affect that also. But
yeah, and I think there are challenges here as well. Again, just speaking personally, there's state law tax issues that you have to get through from an HR perspective. The benefits question is one that's also totally different. I mean, if you're like most healthcare companies have some sort of benefit associated to if you get your care at the healthcare provider, it's a better option. And obviously that doesn't work when they're out of state. So working through those issues is going to be important to make this a reality.
Yeah, I won't even go into some of the issues that raises with out-of-state income tax and
Yep.
That kind of stuff. We'll leave that for another session. So we've combined 2 questions here, 4 and 4A. Are you reshuffling your security program to support a permanent remote workforce? And then are you doing the same thing really in privacy, because they can't really be separated, as we've talked about?
So we're looking at just over 60% of a yes on this one.
For both?
The polling question was not broken out. So.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that may be a technical glitch. And so we'll hit 5. Has your budget been cut for during the current fiscal year due to the pandemic?
So these two questions are interesting to me. The yes is over 65% that it has been cut. And the next question about what it's going to be next year, I think is not surprising, but still interesting. Don't know yet is 83%.
Wow.
And then, yeah, no answers to return to pre-COVID levels.
Yeah.
That is very telling. I know we're getting close on time, but since I have a few minutes, and if there's any questions, Randy, feel free. I'm going to go back to my question, which I wanted to ask Erik, because I actually heard him discuss this at a CISO roundtable, and it was really about new cyber threats, and we were in the middle of COVID. But what are you seeing now in terms of the need for security intel? We had a couple speakers on that today. Information sharing, which really didn't come up, but I know the ISAC and the ISAOs are becoming more active and critical. So what are your thoughts about new threats and how best to take them on?
Yeah, so first of all, let me do a quick little plug. During COVID, the Healthcare Sector Coordinating Council came together and we built out a tactical crisis response guide for when a moment like this happens. What are some things you can do from a security perspective? It's called HIC Ticker. It's HIC TCR, T as in Tom, CR. Take a look at that, because inside there, we talk about 4 elements of looking at a security program in the middle of a crisis. And one of them is about threat intelligence and light touch on threat hunting. But, like what are the various feeds that you can consume? How can you consume them? How can that be, sort of built into your platforms to provide automated defense or automated detection of different types of threats that are out there? I will say that this is a big and complicated question, probably one I don't have more than 2 minutes to talk about. But I think it's critical that for any security program that's out there and any privacy program, that you think first about what are the threats that are active inside your environment. And those threats can be malicious or they can be unintentional. They can be external, they can be internal. And really scope those threats out, put some prominence associated with those threats. What are the top 5 of them that you think are most important? How does that inform your general risks that you're managing throughout your organization, and then build your programs about that? If you stay completely focused on compliance, you're going to lose the signal in the noise. And I'm not suggesting that compliance is bad. Of course, compliance is very good. You need to do it. You got to think about how the threat actors are going to exploit your environment, how they're going to exploit those compliance gaps and weaknesses, and you need to apply your risk management techniques, towards those threats. So I would say, take a beat, go through and profile out what threats you think exist. Hiccup has some great examples of 5 threats that we all face. Look at the MITRE attack framework if you want to, get something specific on that level, and then rethink about your strategies and your programs with that as the primary lens on how to protect the organization.
Thanks, Erik. And I want to be the first as we wrap up to thank you for your time today, and particularly all your efforts, not only at UCM, but on behalf of the sector in Washington with 405D, with the Health Sector Coordinating Council. You have really moved the needle on that, and I thank you for your leadership. To everyone on the call who is still on, and those who had to leave, this is really your conference, and so I thank you for your time and attention today. But I do ask, whether you loved it or hated it, tell us what we did right, what we did wrong, what we can do better. because we're only here. Synergistic is only here because of you and for you. So whether you've given us 1 hour or spent both full days with us, we appreciate it and we thank you. And last but not least, and I'll probably get in trouble for it, I want to thank 4 very special people who made this event all work from the inside. Carrie, Lauren, Sophia, and Maori, thank you for all the work and time and effort and sleepless nights you put into making our first virtual conference happen.
Just a couple little housekeeping things as before we hang up. We will be following up with a survey asking if you need certification for your CEUs. So keep an eye out for that. We will also be sharing recordings of all the sessions. And if you have any immediate need or would like to speak to one of our security consultants, feel free to send something in the chat or send an email to marketing@synergistic.com. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.